The snow fell softly outside the small apartment window as 16-year-old Sophia Chen pressed her fingers against the worn keys of her upright piano. The instrument wasn't much, a second-hand gift from her mother's employer, but to Sophia it was everything. The living room was dimly lit, with just a single lamp illuminating her sheet music. It was nearly midnight, but she couldn't stop practicing. Not when she was this close. Her parents had come to America 15 years ago with nothing but 2 suitcases and dreams for their unborn child. Her father now worked double shifts at the local factory, while her mother cleaned houses during the day and worked as a cashier at night. The walls of their apartment were thin, but the neighbors never complained about Sophia's playing. Perhaps they understood that some dreams require sacrifice, not just from those who dream them, but from everyone around them too. "Sophia, it's late," her mother whispered, appearing in the doorway wrapped in a faded robe. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes from another exhausting day. "You have school tomorrow." "Just 10 more minutes," Sophia replied, not looking up from the keys. "I almost have this passage right." Her mother sighed, but nodded. She had learned years ago that her daughter's determination was a force of nature, something to be respected rather than controlled. Before returning to bed, she placed a cup of warm tea next to the music sheets and gently squeezed Sophia's shoulder. That determination had begun when Sophia was just 4 years old. Her parents had taken her to a free concert in the park, hoping for a nice family outing that wouldn't strain their tight budget. They couldn't have known how that day would change everything. When the pianist took the stage and began to play, little Sophia had stood completely still, mesmerized in a way her parents had never seen before. On their walk home, she'd asked if she could learn to make that beautiful sound too. With no money for lessons, her mother had found an elderly woman at their church who used to teach music back in her home country. Mrs. Lin agreed to teach Sophia for free, saying only that talent should never go to waste because of money. 3 times a week for 8 years, Sophia went to Mrs. Lin's apartment after school, soaking up everything the old woman could teach her about music theory, technique, and the emotional language of classical piano. By 12, Sophia had surpassed what Mrs. Lin could offer. With tears in her eyes, the old teacher had told Sophia's parents that their daughter needed a professional instructor. "She has a gift," Mrs. Lin had said, "the kind that comes along once in a generation." That night, Sophia had found her parents at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, calculating and recalculating figures that refused to add up to enough. Without a word, she'd understood. There was no money for professional lessons. The next day, she'd gone to the public library and checked out every book on piano technique they had. She found free masterclass videos online, watching them on the ancient family computer that frequently crashed mid-video. She practiced scales until her fingers ached, then practiced more. When she was 14, a miracle happened. Her high school music teacher, Mr. Reynolds, heard her playing in the empty auditorium after school. He stood in the doorway listening to her perfect rendition of a Bach prelude, and knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. The next day, he approached her with a business card. "My college roommate teaches at the conservatory downtown," he'd explained. "He sometimes takes on scholarship students. Would you be interested in an audition?" 2 weeks later, Sophia found herself in front of Professor Thomas Chen, no relation, playing for her future. When she finished, the professor had simply said, "Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock. Don't be late." For 2 years, Sophia took the bus downtown every Saturday morning. Professor Chen was demanding, sometimes harsh, but he pushed her to heights she hadn't known were possible. Under his guidance, her playing transformed from technically proficient to truly moving. He taught her that playing the right notes was only the beginning. Making people feel something was the real art. On a cold Tuesday last month, Professor Chen had called her parents. Sophia sat nervously on the couch as her mother spoke on the phone, watching her expression change from confusion to shock. "He wants to enter you in what?" her mother had asked, looking at Sophia with wide eyes. Classical Prodigies was a nationally televised competition where young musicians performed before a panel of world-renowned classical musicians. It wasn't just any competition. It was the competition, the one that had launched careers. Winners received conservatory scholarships and performance opportunities that changed lives. "He says you're ready," her father said that night, his voice a mixture of pride and concern. "But this is a big step. These judges, They can be very hard on young musicians. Sophia nodded. She knew about the judges, especially about Maestro Victor Bartov. Everyone in the classical music world knew about him. Once a celebrated concert pianist himself, Bartov was now infamous for his cutting criticism and impossibly high standards. YouTube compilations of his most brutal takedowns had millions of views. Some contestants left the stage in tears after facing his judgment. "I want to do it," Sophia said simply. "The chance to play on that stage, to be heard by people who could open doors to a future in music, was worth facing even the harshest critic." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Professor Chen increased her lessons to 3 times a week, refusing payment despite the family's protests. "Consider it an investment," he'd said with a rare smile. "When you're famous, I'll tell everyone I taught you." Sophia practiced until her parents had to physically remove her from the piano to eat. She played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in her dreams, her fingers twitching against her blankets as she slept. The piece was technically demanding, emotionally complex, and perfect for showcasing both skill and artistic interpretation. Professor Chen had chosen it carefully, believing it would impress even Maestro Bartov. A week before the competition, disaster struck. The Chen family's old upright piano, the one that had carried Sophia's dreams for so many years, developed a problem. Several keys in the middle register began sticking, making it impossible to practice properly. When the piano technician came, his diagnosis was grim. The repair would cost more than the piano was worth. That evening, Sophia sat at the kitchen table with her parents, all 3 staring at the modest emergency fund they'd been saving for years. "We'll use it for the repair," her father said firmly. "But what if someone gets sick?" Sophia protested. "What if the car breaks down?" Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "Some chances don't come twice," she said softly. "This is your moment." The next day, Professor Chen offered his studio for evening practice sessions. For the final week, Sophia's father drove her downtown after his shift each night, waiting in the car for hours because they couldn't afford the gas for 2 round trips. He'd doze in the driver's seat, exhausted from work but never complaining. Sometimes when Sophia took a break, she'd look out the window and see him there, head resting against the window, sacrificing his rest for her dream. The night before the competition, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, playing the piece in her mind, imagining herself on that stage. What if she made a mistake? What if Maestro Bartov stopped her mid-performance as he was known to do? What if she froze completely? Just after midnight, her bedroom door creaked open and her mother slipped inside. Without a word, she sat on the edge of the bed and began humming softly, a lullaby from her own childhood. It was a melody she'd sung to Sophia since she was a baby, a song about courage and finding your way home. As the familiar tune filled the dark room, Sophia's anxiety began to fade. "Do you remember what Grandma used to say?" her mother asked, stroking Sophia's hair. Sophia nodded. "Music is the voice of the soul. If you play from your heart, someone will always hear you." Her mother smiled. "Tomorrow, play for her. Play for Mrs. Lin. Play for all of us who believe in you. But most importantly, play for yourself." In the morning, Sophia dressed in her best outfit, a simple blue dress her mother had altered to fit perfectly. Professor Chen met them at the competition venue, a grand theater in the city center. As they walked through the backstage area, Sophia saw the other competitors. Many wore designer clothes and carried instrument cases that cost more than her family's car. Some were accompanied by entire entourages, private teachers, parents, even personal assistants. For a moment, doubt crept in. These kids had advantages she'd never had. They'd attended prestigious music schools, studied with famous teachers, played on the finest instruments. How could she possibly compete? Professor Chen must have sensed her thoughts. He stopped her just before they reached the waiting area. "Listen to me," he said, his usually stern face serious but kind. "Those kids out there, many of them have been given everything. You've earned every note, every technique, every bit of musicality you possess. That makes you different. That makes you special." As they entered the waiting area, the television monitors showed the main stage where the judges were being introduced. The audience applauded politely for the first 2 judges. Respect. Acted musicians in their own right. Then Maestro Victor Bartov walked onto the stage and the applause changed, becoming tinged with anticipation. Tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored suit, white hair swept back from a severe face, He acknowledged the audience with a curt nod before taking his seat. The host explained the format. Each young musician would perform their chosen piece, after which the judges would offer their critiques. 3 contestants would be selected to advance to the final round. The cameras panned to the waiting area, briefly showing the nervous young faces backstage. Sophia was scheduled to perform fourth. As the first contestant took the stage, a violinist from a famous musical family, she closed her eyes and went through her mental preparation. She imagined the piece from beginning to end, feeling the emotions of each passage, anticipating the technical challenges. The first 3 contestants performed beautifully, though Maestro Bartov found fault with each one. "Too mechanical," he told the violinist. "You play the notes but miss the music." To a cellist, he commented, "Your technique cannot hide your lack of emotional depth." The third performer, a pianist like Sophia, received a dismissive wave and the comment, "Forgettable." "Next, please." Then it was Sophia's turn. As she walked onto the bright stage, the lights momentarily blinded her. The audience was a dark mass beyond the stage lights. She could just make out the judge's table and Maestro Bartov's stern face watching her approach the gleaming concert grand piano. Her heart pounded as she adjusted the bench. The piano before her was worth more than her family's apartment, a magnificent instrument that professional pianists dreamed of playing. She placed her hands in her lap, took a deep breath, and glanced at the judges. Professor Chen's words echoed in her mind. "You've earned every note." Sophia lifted her hands to the keys and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 filled the concert hall. Sophia's fingers moved with practiced precision, her touch delicate yet confident. The gentle opening melody flowed from the piano like a stream of clear water. As she played, the bright stage lights and the watchful eyes of the judges faded from her awareness. There was only the music now, the conversation between her heart and the keys. She had played this piece hundreds of times in her small living room, but never on an instrument like this. The concert grand responded to her touch with a richness that her old upright could never produce. Each note rang with perfect clarity. Each chord resonated with depth and warmth. For a moment, she allowed herself to be swept away by the sheer beauty of the sound. In the front row, Professor Chen watched with quiet pride. He could see what the judges might not know yet, that this girl's playing came from somewhere deeper than mere practice. There was an honesty to her interpretation, a direct line from soul to sound that couldn't be taught. 30 seconds into her performance, just as Sophia was settling into the piece, a sharp voice cut through the music. "Stop. Stop, stop." Maestro Bartov's hand was raised, his expression one of pained irritation. Sophia's fingers froze above the keys, the music cutting off abruptly. The sudden silence felt like a physical blow. The camera zoomed in on Bartov's face as he leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Young lady," he said, his accent thick with disdain, "what do you think you're doing?" Sophia blinked, confused. "I'm playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1, sir." "No," Bartov said, drawing out the word. "You are murdering Chopin's Ballad No. 1. There's a significant difference." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the audience. The other judges shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. The host of the show, a polished woman in a red dress, looked nervously between Sophia and the famous maestro. Bartov stood up, gesturing impatiently. "Your approach is completely amateurish. The opening should be contemplative, mysterious, not played like a simple folk tune. And you're peddling." He made a disgusted sound. "It's like listening to someone play underwater." The camera caught Sophia's face as the color drained from it. Her hands dropped to her lap as Bartov continued. "Your posture is stiff, your phrasing unimaginative. You're playing notes, not music." He shook his head. "This piece requires emotional depth that frankly I don't think you possess. The technical elements, those can be taught. But the soul of the music? That cannot be faked." In the audience, Sophia's parents sat frozen. Her mother gripped her father's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. They had sacrificed so much to be here today, taking unpaid leave from work, borrowing gas money for the drive, only to watch their daughter being humiliated on national television. Backstage, the other contestants watched on monitors, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed relief that it wasn't them facing Bartov's infamous temper. "How long have you been playing?" Bartov demanded. 12 years, sir," Sophia answered, her voice barely audible. 12 years. He repeated the number as if it explained everything. And in all that time, no one told you that Chopin is not meant to be played like background music in a shopping mall? A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek, catching the stage lights. She quickly wiped it away, but not before the cameras captured it. Later, this moment would be replayed thousands of times on social media, the young pianist's heartbreak broadcast for all to see. Perhaps, Bartov continued, his voice slightly softer but no less cutting, you should consider a different hobby altogether. Piano requires not just practice but insight, understanding, a connection to the composer's intention that goes beyond the printed page. The other judges were growing visibly uncomfortable. The woman to Bartov's right, a renowned cellist named Dr. Winters, leaned toward him and whispered something, but he waved her off. I'm doing her a favor, he said loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. Better to know now than waste more years. Sophia sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the keyboard. The tears were flowing freely now, but she made no sound. In that moment, she saw all her dreams crumbling. The years of practice, the sacrifices her family had made, Professor Chen's belief in her talent, all of it reduced to nothing by the harsh words of this man who knew nothing about her or her journey. But somewhere in the midst of her humiliation, something shifted. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice from the night before. Play for yourself. And suddenly the weight of Bartov's judgment began to lift. Who was he to tell her what music meant to her? Who was he to decide whether her connection to Chopin was valid? She had lived with this piece for months, had felt its joy and sorrow in her bones. No one, not even the great Maestro Bartov, could take that away from her. She stood up from the piano bench, knees shaking but back straight. The host moved forward, clearly expecting her to leave the stage. But Sophia stepped toward the judges' table instead. Excuse me, Maestro Bartov, she said, her voice stronger now. The audience fell silent, surprised by this unexpected turn. Contestants rarely responded to the judges, especially not to Bartov. Yes? He said, eyebrows raised in what appeared to be genuine surprise. I understand you didn't care for my interpretation of Chopin, Sophia said, and you're entitled to your opinion. But I would like the opportunity to play something else if that's allowed by the competition rules. The host looked uncertainly at the judges. Well, it's not usual practice, but I don't think there's anything in the rules against it. Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. I think we can make an exception. What would you like to play for us? Sophia took a deep breath. What she was about to do was risky, perhaps even foolish, but something inside her refused to walk off that stage defeated. I'd like to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. The first movement, a murmur ran through the audience. Even those with limited musical knowledge recognized the piece as one of the most technically demanding in the classical piano repertoire. Professional pianists spent years mastering it. For a 16-year-old to attempt it in this context seemed almost absurd. Bartov's eyebrows shot up. Rachmaninoff's third? You can't be serious. I am serious, sir, Sophia replied. Unless you'd prefer I didn't. It was a subtle challenge, and everyone in the room felt it. If Bartov refused her now, he would appear afraid, as if he doubted his own judgment after dismissing her so thoroughly. If he agreed, he risked being proven wrong about her abilities. After a long pause, he gave a dismissive wave. By all means, he said, though I think we're all in for another disappointment. What Bartov didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Rachmaninoff's third held special significance for him. Early in his career, during a high-profile concert with the London Philharmonic, he had attempted the piece and faltered badly in the notoriously difficult cadenza. Critics had been merciless, calling it the most spectacular breakdown of a promising career and proof that technical brilliance cannot compensate for artistic overreach, though he had gone on to rebuild his reputation as both a performer and conductor. He had never again attempted the piece in public. Sophia returned to the piano, adjusting the bench once more. She had not planned to play this piece today. In fact, she had never performed it for anyone except Professor Chen. It had been her secret project for the past year, a challenge she had set for herself after hearing a recording by the legendary Martha Argerich. Professor Chen had warned her that it was too ambitious, that she should wait a few more years before tackling it seriously. But she had persisted, working on it in private, often late at night when her parents were asleep. She didn't fully understand why she was drawn to this particular concerto, only that something in its emotional landscape spoke to her, its moments of thunderous power balanced by passages of heartbreaking tenderness. As she placed her hands on the keys, she glanced out at the audience. She could just make out her parents' faces in the dim light. Her mother had both hands pressed to her mouth. Her father sat perfectly still, his expression a mixture of fear and fierce pride. Near them, Professor Chen had leaned forward in his seat, eyes wide with surprise. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. Then, without looking at the judges, she began to play. The concerto begins with a deceptively simple melody, quiet and thoughtful, like someone testing the waters before diving in. Sophia played these opening bars with restraint, letting the theme unfold naturally. It was a stark contrast to the passionate Chopin she had begun earlier. In the judges' seats, Bartov had crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. Beside him, Dr. Winters was watching with growing interest, her head tilted slightly as if reassessing the young woman at the piano. As Sophia moved into the more technically demanding passages, her confidence grew. Her fingers found the complex patterns with increasing assurance, her body swaying slightly as she leaned into the music. This was familiar territory now, the hours of practice guiding her hands almost without conscious thought. The audience began to sense that something extraordinary was happening. The atmosphere in the hall changed, the earlier discomfort giving way to a collective holding of breath. Even the cameramen, usually focused only on getting their shots, found themselves watching the performance rather than their monitors. When Sophia reached the cadenza, the very section where Bartov had famously faltered, she attacked it with both precision and abandon. Her small hands stretched to their limits across the keyboard, finding impossible chords, executing lightning-fast runs that blurred into cascades of sound. There was no hesitation, no hint of fear, only music pouring from her fingers as naturally as breath. From his seat, Professor Chen watched in astonishment. He had known she was working on the piece but had never heard her play it with such mastery. This was not the same student who had come to his studio each week. This was an artist being born before his eyes. The cameras caught Bartov's face as his expression shifted from dismissive to confused to something approaching wonder. The piece he had never conquered was being played with stunning authority by the very girl he had just humiliated. His hands, resting on the table, twitched slightly as if remembering their own failure with these same passages. As Sophia neared the end of the movement, the full power of the concerto was unleashed. Her small frame seemed to grow larger at the keyboard, her presence filling the hall. The final chords resonated through the space, bold and defiant, before resolving into a moment of perfect stillness. Then silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved, no one breathed, and then the audience erupted. The applause was deafening. People jumped to their feet, their faces alive with the thrill of witnessing something truly extraordinary. In the front row, Sophia's parents stood with tears streaming down their faces. Her father, a man who rarely showed emotion, was openly weeping, his hands clapping so hard they must have hurt. Sophia remained seated at the piano, momentarily stunned by the reaction. She had been so lost in the music that she'd forgotten about the audience, the cameras, even Maestro Bartov. Now, as the wave of sound washed over her, she felt a mix of relief, pride, and lingering disbelief. Had she really just done that? Professor Chen was on his feet too, nodding with fierce approval. His eyes met hers across the distance, and in that moment a world of understanding passed between them. He had always known what she was capable of, even when she hadn't. The host of the show hurried onto the stage, clearly flustered by this unexpected turn of events. The program had a strict schedule to maintain, but cutting short this response would be television suicide. She gestured for Sophia to stand and acknowledge the audience. Sophia rose from the bench on shaky legs. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was ebbing now, leaving her lightheaded and trembling. She managed a small bow which only intensified the applause. After nearly a full minute, the host finally raised her hands, signaling for quiet. The audience gradually settled, though scattered applause continued to break out like aftershocks following an earthquake. "Well," the host said, her professional smile back in place but her eyes still wide with surprise, "I think we can all agree that was unexpected." She turned to the judge's table. Maestro Bartov, I believe you have something to say? The cameras swung to Bartov, who sat unnaturally still, his face an unreadable mask. The entire hall held its breath, waiting. This was the moment that would define not just Sofia's future in the competition, but potentially Bartov's reputation as well. The famous maestro cleared his throat. He straightened his already impeccable tie, a gesture that those who knew him recognized as a sign of discomfort. Young lady, he began, his voice lacking its earlier sharpness. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Bartov was never at a loss for words. It was one of the things that made him such a feared judge. That was a technically impressive performance, he finally continued. Your command of the more difficult passages was adequate. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the audience. After what they had just witnessed, adequate seemed like the understatement of the century. Dr. Winters, the cellist, leaned toward her microphone. I think what my colleague means to say, she interjected, unable to hide her smile, is that your performance was remarkable, particularly given your age and the extreme difficulty of the piece you chose. Bartov shot her an irritated glance but didn't contradict her. Instead, he focused again on Sofia, who stood quietly by the piano, waiting. What made you choose Rachmaninoff's Third? He asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his carefully maintained facade. Sofia considered the question. She could have mentioned that she knew about his history with the piece. It would have been the perfect moment for revenge. But despite everything, that wasn't why she had played it. I love how it balances technical challenges with emotional depth, she said simply. It demands everything from the performer: precision, power, vulnerability. When I play it, I feel like I'm telling a complete story. Something flickered across Bartov's face, a flash of recognition, perhaps even respect. And where did you learn it? He pressed. Who taught you the cadenza? I mostly taught myself, Sofia admitted. I've been working on it for about a year. My teacher, she glanced at Professor Chen, helped with some of the technical aspects, but he actually advised me not to perform it yet. This revelation caused another stir in the audience. The idea that this young girl had largely taught herself one of the most notoriously difficult pieces in the piano repertoire seemed almost impossible. Bartov leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. You do realize, he said slowly, that professional pianists twice your age struggle with this concerto? That some never master it in their entire careers? Sofia nodded. I know it's not perfect. There are still passages I'm working to improve. Yet you chose to play it today, Bartov said. It wasn't quite a question, but Sofia answered anyway. You said I lacked emotional depth, she replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. I wanted to show you that wasn't true. The blunt honesty of her response caught everyone off guard. Contestants didn't speak to Maestro Bartov this way, especially not after he had criticized them. Yet there was no disrespect in her tone, only a quiet determination to be heard. For a long moment, Bartov simply looked at her. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the hall, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in what might almost have been a smile. Well, he said, I believe you've made your point. The third judge, a composer who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. If I may, he said, I'd like to ask about your interpretation of the quieter passages. There was a delicacy there that I found quite moving. As Sofia began to answer, describing how she imagined those sections as conversations between different voices, the cameras caught Bartov watching her with an expression of growing intrigue. Whatever he had expected from this competition, it certainly wasn't this slip of a girl challenging not just his authority but his own musical past. Backstage, the other contestants exchanged looks of disbelief. The narrative had completely changed. What should have been a routine elimination, another victim of Bartov's cutting criticism, had transformed into the most compelling moment of the competition so far. After the judges finished their questions, the host stepped forward again. Thank you, Sofia. That was truly exceptional. We'll now move on to our next contestant. As Sofia left the stage, legs still wobbly from the intensity of the experience, she was met in the wings by a production assistant who whispered, They want you for an interview when the round is finished. An interview? Sofia repeated, confused. Eliminated contestants didn't usually get interviews. The segment producer says this is going to be the highlight of the episode, the assistant explained, leading her to a small waiting area. You've basically broken the internet already. What do you mean? The assistant held up a tablet, showing a social media feed that was exploding with clips and comments from the performance. Hashtags like Our Piano Girl and War Bartov Takedown were trending. Even as Sophia watched, the view count on a clip of her playing the cadenza ticked up by thousands. Your face when he stopped you, and then your comeback with Rachmaninoff. People are going crazy for it, the assistant said, sounding almost in awe. The contrast is just so perfect for TV. Sophia handed back the tablet, suddenly uncomfortable. She hadn't played for views or hashtags or to take down anyone. She had played because music was the language her heart spoke most fluently, because in those moments at the piano, she was most truly herself. Can I see my parents? She asked. After the interviews, the assistant replied. The producers want to get everything while it's still fresh. Fresh, as if her humiliation and subsequent redemption were ingredients in a recipe. Sophia felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. The emotional roller coaster of the past hour had drained her completely. She sank into a chair, closing her eyes for a moment. In the monitor nearby, she could hear the next contestant beginning their piece, a violin concerto that suddenly seemed very far away. A soft touch on her shoulder made her open her eyes. Professor Chen stood there, having somehow navigated his way backstage. You shouldn't be here, Sophia said, though she was intensely grateful to see a familiar face. They can throw me out if they want, he replied with a dismissive gesture. I needed to make sure you were all right. I don't know what I am, Sophia admitted. It all happened so fast, Professor Chen nodded. That's how these moments are. 1 minute you're just another young musician. The next you're someone people will remember. I didn't play it to show off, Sophia said, suddenly needing him to understand, or to embarrass Maestro Bartov. You played it because it was the truth of who you are, Professor Chen finished for her. I know, he sat down beside her. Sophia, what happened out there wasn't about Bartov or the competition or even about proving yourself. It was about music doing what it's supposed to do, revealing the human spirit in its purest form. But now everyone's talking about it like it was some kind of battle, she said, gesturing toward the tablet the assistant had left behind, like I was trying to humiliate him the way he humiliated me. People will always create narratives that make sense to them, Professor Chen said gently. But you and I know what really happened. You spoke your truth through music and the world listened. He paused, studying her face. Are you sorry you played it? Sophia considered the question. Despite the chaos that had followed, despite the uncomfortable attention now focused on her, she couldn't regret sharing the piece that had lived in her heart for so long. No, she said finally. I'm not sorry, Professor Chen smiled. Good. Because whether you intended it or not, you've just changed the trajectory of your life. And his, what do you mean? Before he could answer, the backstage door opened and Sophia's parents rushed in, ignoring the protests of the security guard behind them. Her mother enveloped her in a fierce hug while her father stood nearby, his eyes still red from tears. My brave, brilliant girl, her mother whispered. We are so proud of you. Her father, never comfortable with words, simply placed his hand on her head in a gesture of blessing he had used since she was small. Over her mother's shoulder, Sophia noticed a figure standing in the doorway, watching the family reunion with an unreadable expression. It was Maestro Bartov himself, his imposing presence causing the room to fall silent. He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid as always. But there was something different in his eyes, something that looked almost like uncertainty. Miss Chen, he said formally. I wonder if I might have a word. The small backstage room fell silent. Sophia's mother instinctively moved closer to her daughter, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Maestro Bartov. Her father straightened his posture, chin lifting slightly as if preparing for another confrontation. Perhaps this isn't the best time, Professor Chen suggested, his tone polite but firm. I understand, Bartov replied, surprising everyone with his uncharacteristic restraint. But what I have to say cannot wait until after the competition. He turned his attention directly to Sophia. It will only take a moment. Sophia looked at her parents, then at Professor Chen. All three wore expressions of concern, but she could see they were leaving the decision to her. After a brief hesitation, she nodded. "It's okay," she told them. "I'll talk with him." Her mother squeezed her hand before stepping back. Professor Chen gave Bartov a meaningful look that clearly communicated a warning. "Be gentle with my student. Perhaps we could step into the hallway," Bartov suggested. Sophia followed him to a quiet corridor away from the bustle of the competition. Production assistants and contestants hurried past, some doing double takes at the sight of the famous Maestro standing with the girl who had just challenged his authority so dramatically. Once they were relatively alone, Bartov turned to face her. Up close, away from the harsh stage lights and cameras, he looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than they appeared on television. For a long moment he simply studied her as if seeing her properly for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. Sophia blinked in surprise. These were the last words she had expected to hear from the notoriously prideful musician. "My comments were unnecessarily harsh," he continued. "And more importantly, they were wrong." He clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture that seemed to help him maintain his composure. "In 40 years of judging young musicians, I have developed certain expectations, patterns I look for. When you began playing Chopin, I heard what I expected to hear. Another technically proficient but emotionally undeveloped interpretation. I made a judgment before truly listening." Sophia remained silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from a man known for his unyielding opinions. "When you played Rachmaninoff," Bartov continued, "you forced me to actually listen. And what I heard was—" He paused, searching for the right words. "What I heard was truth. Your truth, expressed through one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire." He looked away briefly, his gaze traveling down the corridor as if looking into the past. "Do you know why that particular concerto means so much to me?" "I've heard stories," Sophia admitted carefully. "About a concert in London." A ghost of a smile touched Bartov's lips. "Ah, so you chose it deliberately," I wondered. "Not to embarrass you," Sophia said quickly. "I didn't play it because you couldn't. I played it because I could." The simple honesty of her statement seemed to catch Bartov off guard. He studied her face again, as if trying to determine whether there was any guile behind her words. "The London Philharmonic," he said after a moment. 1982. I was 32 years old and already being hailed as one of the great pianists of my generation. Too much praise too soon, it makes one arrogant. His expression grew distant. "I insisted on performing Rachmaninoff's Third despite my conductor's reservations. I was certain I had mastered it." He shook his head slightly at the memory. "I hadn't. When I reached the cadenza, the very section you played so beautifully today, my mind simply went blank. My fingers froze. The silence in that hall was the most devastating sound I have ever heard." Sophia could almost feel the echo of that decades-old humiliation. "What did you do?" she asked softly. "I stopped playing," Bartov said simply. "I stood up, bowed to the audience, and walked off stage. I never performed that piece again." "But you continued to play other works," Sophia pointed out. "You didn't give up on your career." "No. But something changed that night." He met her eyes directly. "I became a harsher critic of myself and of others, especially of young musicians who reminded me of my younger self, who showed the same reckless confidence." Understanding dawned on Sophia. "Like me," Bartov nodded. "When you asked to play Rachmaninoff, I was certain you would fail. Part of me, a part I'm not proud of, wanted you to fail, to learn the lesson I had learned, that some mountains cannot be climbed without falls along the way." "But I didn't fail," Sophia said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "No," Bartov agreed. "You did not. And in succeeding where I once failed, you forced me to confront something I have avoided for decades." He took a deep breath. "The possibility that I gave up too easily, that I allowed one failure to define my relationship with a piece of music I have always loved." A sudden burst of applause from the main hall interrupted their conversation, another contestant finishing their performance. The sound seemed to remind Bartov of where they were and why. "I didn't bring you out here merely to reminisce about my past failures," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "I wanted to tell you that regardless of the competition results, which are determined by all three judges, not just myself, I would like to offer you an opportunity." Sophia waited, hardly daring to breathe. Each summer, I conduct a series of masterclasses for exceptional young pianists at the European Conservatory in Vienna. It is a 6-week program, all expenses paid. The students selected receive intensive training and perform with professional orchestras. Many go on to significant careers. He paused, watching her reaction. I would like to offer you a place in this summer's program. Sophia's heart raced. The European Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. To study there, even for a summer program, was a dream beyond anything she had allowed herself to imagine. That's incredibly generous, she managed to say. It is not generosity, Bartov corrected her. It is recognition of exceptional talent. You have earned it. A production assistant appeared at the end of the corridor, gesturing urgently. Maestro Bartov, they need you back at the judges' table. We're resuming in 2 minutes. Bartov nodded acknowledgement before turning back to Sophia. Think about my offer. We can discuss the details after the competition concludes. As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him. Maestro Bartov? He paused, looking back at her. Thank you, she said. Not just for the opportunity, but for telling me about London. For being honest. Something softened in his expression. Perhaps we can both learn from each other, he said. Then with a slight bow of his head, he was gone, striding back toward the main hall. Sophia remained in the corridor for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. When she finally returned to the waiting area, her parents and Professor Chen looked up expectantly. What did he want? Her mother asked, concern still evident in her voice. He apologized, Sophia said, still hardly believing it herself, and he offered me a place in his summer program at the European Conservatory. Professor Chen's eyes widened. That's unprecedented. Bartov never personally invites students to that program. The selection process is extremely competitive. Did you accept? Her father asked. We'll discuss the details later, Sophia replied, echoing Bartov's words. After the competition. Her mother frowned slightly. Vienna is very far away, and we could never afford— he said it's all expenses paid, Sophia explained. Professor Chen nodded. That's standard for his program. The conservatory covers everything: travel, accommodation, meals, even the use of their instruments. A different production assistant approached them. Sophia, they're ready for your interview now. As she followed the assistant toward the interview area, Sophia found herself in a strange state of calm. The emotional whiplash of the past hour, from humiliation to triumph to this unexpected opportunity, had left her feeling almost detached, as if watching events unfold around someone else. The interview setup was simple: 2 chairs facing each other in a small room, decorated with the competition's logo. The interviewer, a friendly-looking woman with a clipboard, greeted Sophia warmly. That was quite a performance, she said as the camera operator made final adjustments. You've become the story of the competition. Sophia smiled politely but said nothing. She was learning quickly that in this world of television and social media, everything could become a story, packaged and presented for maximum dramatic effect. We're rolling in 3, 2. The camera operator pointed silently to indicate they were recording. I'm here with Sophia Chen, whose remarkable performance of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto has taken the classical music world by storm, the interviewer began. Sophia, talk us through what was going through your mind when Maestro Bartov stopped your first performance. Sophia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. It was difficult, of course. No one wants to be criticized that way, especially on television. But in that moment I had a choice: to accept his judgment as the final word, or to show him who I really am as a musician. And that led to your decision to play Rachmaninoff, a piece that Bartov himself famously struggled with. Was that a deliberate choice to challenge him? I chose it because it's a piece that means a lot to me, Sophia said, sidestepping the implied drama. I've been working on it for a long time, and I felt it would better demonstrate my abilities. The interviewer leaned forward slightly. Sources tell us that after your performance, Maestro Bartov took you aside for a private conversation. Can you share what was discussed? Sophia hesitated. The interaction with Bartov had felt personal, almost intimate in its honesty. To share it now would feel like a betrayal of a fragile trust that had just begun to form. He offered some constructive feedback, she said instead, and we discussed possible future opportunities. The interviewer looked slightly disappointed at this diplomatic answer but pressed on. Your performance has already gone viral online. How does it feel to become an overnight sensation? This question caught Sophia off guard. The idea of being a sensation felt completely disconnected from her relationship with music, which had always been about personal expression rather than public recognition. It's surprising, she admitted. I didn't play for attention or to become viral. I played because music is how I express myself most honestly. As the interview continued, Sophia found herself increasingly aware of the gap between her experience and how it was being presented. The questions focused on drama and conflict, Bartov's criticism, her comeback, the social media reaction, rather than on the music itself or the years of dedication that had brought her to this moment. When it was finally over, she felt drained in a way that even the intense performance hadn't caused. This world of cameras and interviews, of hashtags and viral clips, was entirely foreign to her. All she had ever wanted was to play piano, to speak through music the things she couldn't express in words. As she left the interview room, she found Professor Chen waiting for her. How did it go? He asked. It was strange, Sophia replied. They wanted to make it all about conflict and drama, about showing up Maestro Bartov. Professor Chen nodded knowingly. That's how it works in this industry. They need a narrative that sells. But remember, Sophia, that's their story, not yours. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Your story is between you and the piano. Everything else is just noise. Sophia smiled, grateful for his understanding. What happens now? Now we wait for the judge's decision, he said. But whatever happens next, something important has already changed. You played from your heart today without fear. That's a victory no one can take from you. Together, they walked back toward the main hall, where the final contestants were still performing. The day's events had opened a door Sophia hadn't even known existed, a door to a bigger world of music, opportunity, and yes, challenges. But as Professor Chen had reminded her, at the center of it all was still that pure connection between her heart and the piano. That was her truth. That was her story, and she was just beginning to tell it. 3 months had passed since the competition, and Sophia's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She stood in the wings of the National Concert Hall, peering out at the packed auditorium. Every seat was filled, the low hum of anticipation hanging in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm. Nervous? A familiar voice asked behind her. She turned to find Maestro Bartov adjusting his bow tie, his expression softer than it had been that first day on the competition stage. Though no less intense, a little, Sophia admitted. It's my first time performing with a full orchestra. Good, Bartov said with a slight nod. Nervousness means you care. It means you respect the music and the audience. The day you stop feeling nervous is the day you should worry. In the 3 months since their unexpected encounter, Sophia had come to understand the man behind the intimidating public persona. After the competition, where she had placed second overall, a remarkable achievement given the circumstances, Bartov had moved quickly to arrange her participation in his summer program in Vienna. When financial reality threatened to intervene, her parents couldn't afford to take unpaid leave to accompany her to Europe as required for a minor. Bartov had made an unprecedented offer. He would bring the program to her, or at least part of it. For 6 intensive weeks he had come to her city twice weekly, working with her at Professor Chen's studio. What began as formal teaching sessions gradually evolved into a deeper mentorship, with Bartov sharing not just technical guidance but the wisdom gained from his decades in the world of classical music. Today marked the culmination of that mentorship. Sophia's debut as a featured soloist with the National Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Maestro Bartov himself. The program included, of course, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, the piece that had connected them in such an unexpected way. 5 minutes. Maestro, a stagehand called softly. Bartov nodded acknowledgement before turning back to Sophia. Remember what we discussed about the cadenza. Don't rush the opening. Let the tension build naturally. I remember, she said. In their work together, he had helped her refine her interpretation, finding new depths in a piece she thought she already knew intimately. Your parents are here? He asked, though he knew the answer. Front row, Sophia confirmed, along with Professor Chen and Mrs. Lin. The elderly woman who had given Sophia her first lessons had been thrilled when Sophia personally arranged for her ticket to the Concert Bartov's expression grew serious. Sophia, before we go out there, I want you to know something. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What happened at the competition, the way we met, was not ideal. But I have come to believe it was necessary. Necessary, Sophia echoed, unsure of his meaning. Yes. Necessary for both of us. He glanced out toward the waiting audience. I had become calcified in my approach to music and to teaching. I had forgotten what it means to hear something for the first time, to be surprised, to have my assumptions challenged. He looked back at her, his gaze direct. You reminded me why I became a musician in the first place. Not to judge or to impress, but to communicate something true. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. Coming from Bartov, this was more than praise. It was a recognition of her as a fellow artist, not just a promising student. 2 minutes, the stagehand called. I should go, Bartov said. The conductor enters first, as you know. Maestro, Sophia said quickly before he could leave. Thank you. For everything. He gave her a rare smile. Tonight we thank each other through music. That is the greatest gift between musicians. With a slight bow of his head, he turned and walked toward the stage entrance. Sophia took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her concert dress. A simple but elegant blue gown her mother had altered herself. So much had changed since that nerve-wracking day at the competition. The viral video of her performance had led to opportunities she'd never dreamed of. Interviews, invitations to perform, even scholarship offers from prestigious conservatories. Her parents, seeing her potential future taking shape, had made the difficult decision to support her pursuit of music full-time after high school graduation. But more significant than these external changes was the internal transformation. The girl who had doubted whether she belonged on that competition stage now stood ready to perform with one of the country's premier orchestras. Not because she had something to prove, but because she had something to share. The sound of applause pulled her from her thoughts. Bartov had taken the stage, acknowledging the audience with his characteristic dignified bow. After briefly leading the orchestra through the opening piece, a short Beethoven overture, he stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, it is my great pleasure to introduce our soloist for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Some of you may already know her from a certain competition video that has, as the young people say, gone viral. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. But what that brief glimpse cannot show you is the extraordinary musicianship, the dedication and the pure artistic spirit this young pianist brings to her craft. It has been my privilege to work with her these past months, and I can say without hesitation that we are witnessing the beginning of a remarkable career. He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the hall. Please welcome to the stage, Miss Sophia Chen. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic as Sophia walked onto the stage. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, but rather than intimidating her, it filled her with a strange calm. These people had come to hear music, to share in something beautiful and meaningful. That was a gift she could give them. She approached the magnificent concert grand piano at center stage, taking a moment to adjust the bench to the perfect height. As she sat, she caught sight of her parents in the front row, her mother clutching a handkerchief, her father sitting tall with unmistakable pride. Beside them, Professor Chen gave her an encouraging nod, while Mrs. Lin wiped away a tear. Sophia turned toward Bartov, who had taken his position at the conductor's podium. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. He raised his baton and she placed her hands on the keys. The orchestra began the opening theme, that haunting, questioning melody that had captured Sophia's imagination the first time she heard it. When her moment came to join, her fingers found the keys with absolute certainty, adding her voice to the musical conversation that was already unfolding. As the concerto progressed, Sophia felt herself entering that rare state where conscious thought falls away, and the music seems to play itself through you. Her hands moved across the keyboard as if they had their own intelligence, finding not just the right notes but the right feeling for each phrase. The orchestra responded to her playing, Bartov guiding them to support and complement her interpretation. When she reached the cadenza, that pivotal moment that had once defeated Bartov and later announced her own arrival as a serious artist, she felt a momentary connection across time to Rachmaninoff himself, composing this magnificent work over a century ago. To the younger Bartov, whose painful experience had shaped his entire career. To her own younger self, practicing in the dim light of her family's small apartment, dreaming of moments like this. Her fingers danced through the impossibly complex passages, finding both technical precision and emotional truth. In the audience, people leaned forward in their seats, some closing their eyes to better absorb the music, others watching in amazement as this young girl commanded the massive piano with such authority. At the conductor's podium, Bartov watched with a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in his student, certainly. Admiration for her artistry, but also a kind of healing as if through her success. Some old wound in himself was finally closing. As the concerto approached its thunderous conclusion, orchestra and piano joining in a final triumphant statement, Sophia felt a joy so pure it was almost overwhelming. This was why she played. Not for applause or recognition, but for this transcendent connection. To the music, to the other musicians, to the audience, and to herself. The final chords resonated through the hall, Bartov holding the orchestra in perfect balance with her powerful playing. As the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical pause when an audience is so moved they forget to applaud. Then the hall erupted. People rose to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation, their faces alight with the special glow that comes from witnessing something extraordinary. Sophia stood from the piano bench, slightly dazed by the response. Bartov stepped down from his podium and walked to her side, taking her hand to acknowledge the audience together. As they bowed, he leaned closer to speak in her ear above the continuing applause. "That," he said simply, "is how it's supposed to feel." Later that evening, after multiple curtain calls and an impromptu reception in the green room, Sophia sat quietly with her family in a small restaurant near the concert hall. They had been joined by Professor Chen, Mrs. Lin, and somewhat surprisingly, Maestro Bartov himself, who had declined several invitations from board members and patrons to join Sophia's family instead. As her parents chatted excitedly with Mrs. Lin about the performance, Bartov turned to Sophia. "I've been asked to conduct a series of concerts in Europe next season," he said. "Paris, Berlin, London. The organizers have specifically requested that you join as soloist for select performances." Sophia's eyes widened. "Europe, really?" Bartov nodded. "Only if you wish to, of course. And only if your studies permit." He glanced at her parents. "We would ensure proper arrangements for a guardian to accompany you." I don't know what to say," Sophia stammered. "Say nothing yet," Bartov advised. "Discuss it with your family. With Professor Chen. There will be many such opportunities in your future, Sophia. You can afford to be selective." As the evening wound down, Professor Chen raised his glass in a toast. "To music," he said simply. "To music," they all echoed. Outside the restaurant, as they prepared to part ways, Bartov shook hands formally with Sophia's parents and Professor Chen. To Mrs. Lin, he gave a respectful bow, acknowledging her role as Sophia's first teacher. When he came to Sophia, he hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic emotion. "I have taught hundreds of young musicians over the years," he said. "Many of them technically gifted, some truly exceptional. But very few have reminded me of what music is for, what it can do when it comes from a place of absolute authenticity." He reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box. "I want you to have this." Sophia opened it to find an elegant, silver baton pin, the kind conductors sometimes wear on formal occasions. "This was given to me by my own mentor many years ago," Bartov explained. "He told me that our greatest responsibility as musicians is not to perform perfectly, but to pass on what we have learned, to keep the conversation going across generations." Sophia looked up at him, deeply moved by the gesture. "You have taught me as much as I have taught you," Bartov continued. "That is the mark of a true musical relationship. Never forget that music is not about competition or perfection. It is about communication, about sharing something true." As Sophia and her family drove home that night, the city lights blurring past the car windows, she thought about the extraordinary journey of the past 3 months. From the humiliation of being stopped mid-performance to the triumph of tonight's concert, from seeing Bartov as an intimidating judge to finding in him a mentor and advocate. But most of all, she thought about the music itself. How it had been her constant companion through every challenge and every joy. How it had given her a voice when words failed. How it had connected her to something larger than herself. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the silver pin in her pocket and the memory of applause still ringing in her ears. Whatever came next, conservatory, European concerts, or paths, she couldn't yet imagine. She knew that the conversation between her heart and the piano would continue. And that in the end was the greatest transformation of all.